South African language in education policy of 1997 was created to contribute to the transformation of the education sector and the country as a whole. Now, this was to be achieved through the promotion as well as the use of African languages that were marginalized during the apartheid era. The mechanism of addictive bilingualism was identified as the key to achieving the goals of quality education and equitable treatment within the pragmatic framework. However, 2 decades on, the policy has not been effectively implemented, nor does the implementation appear imminent. Now, to talk to us about this, we are joined in studio by Itai Chitapi, who is an education activist. Apologies for butchering your name there. What is the importance of education, more specifically language, especially in our society?
Thanks very much. Thanks very much.
Sure.
The importance of language in education, if you think about it, is the same as the importance of language in society. Nothing happens in a society without language, right? So everything that happens in a society requires language, from what goes on in a classroom to what goes on the street to what happens in a boardroom, in a studio, in an engineering environment. Anywhere, language is required. So if you are planning how to use language in society, you are actually planning that society.
How do we then plan to decolonize our education system when we do know that the primary language that we use is definitely English? It's the language that we are communicating in right now. It's the language primarily used in schools and universities. How realistic is that?
So let's stick with the first part of the question about how do we decolonize, and we need to understand what is it we're actually trying to achieve and why. So if you think about education in almost any part of the world, and really the main exceptions are those places where particularly the British have gone and done what they did in terms of colonizing.
Yeah.
But in most places in the world, children learn in the same language that they use at home. Africa broadly is the major exception, and certainly some parts of South America and perhaps a few others. In most other parts of the world, people use the same language they use at home in the classroom.
Yeah.
Even if they are going to go on to use a different language later on, whether it's a more international language or more important regional language, the foundations are built in their own languages. And if you do that, then you end up with a situation where every child feels initially confident to learn, starting in their own language. They're given the tools with which to learn in their own language, and from there they're given the tools with which to learn in any other language that might be relevant. In South Africa, in many places in Africa, this simply hasn't been the case, and where often we get away with it because we have embedded English and French and others so deeply that they take over very early on. In places like South Africa, quite frankly, so many people are still comfortable and prefer their own languages that they really struggle when they are now forced fairly early on in the educational system to switch to English.
But is there a willingness though from just South Africans to I guess really explore their languages and use it, be it in presentations in boardrooms or even talking between friends, the communication between friends? We do know that around 2015, 2016, young people, much of them in universities, were really highlighted this issue of decolonizing education, but since then there isn't really much talk about that.
I think part of the problem is that we do like the idea of slogans and of sound bites. And when we really think a little more carefully about this, we realize that this is difficult. You mentioned we are having this conversation in English. As an activist, when I think about the future, I want to see a future in which you and I will be having this conversation in Sesotho or in isiZulu or in Tshivenda. Even if those are not our languages, they are African languages that can be built up and developed so that they can be used in these contexts. This is really difficult work that must be done over a long period of time. If you think about what Afrikaans became, and your previous guest mentioned it in passing perhaps, certainly when she talked about how we are trained through colonialism and apartheid to dislike the things that are African. What Afrikaners did in various ways was to develop a sense of real pride and attachment to their language, so that they did the hard work of developing the language. Yes, they may have taken power in wrong ways and used some of that power, perhaps illegitimately, to pull up and to promote Afrikaans as a language. As she mentioned, Afrikaans has only been a formal language for less than 100 years.
All right.
And we need to do something similar without disempowering people or disrespecting people.
And it begins with, honestly, just conversations like this, even though they're done in English. But that's where I'll have to leave it with you. Thank you so much for your time. That was Itai Chitapi, who is an education activist.